There is a woman who walks through life quietly. You see her in the office, calm and composed. You see her in her home, peaceful and grounded. You see her in public, confident in her own presence. She does not chase attention, she does not beg to sit at anyone's table, and she refuses to sacrifice her standards to feel included. Some look at her and assume loneliness. What they fail to understand is this: solitude is not the absence of connection, it is the presence of strength. A woman with no friends is not always a woman who cannot keep them. Often, she is a woman who refuses to entertain superficial bonds, perform for attention, or dilute her value just to belong. She has seen the games, the gossip, the jealousy, the competition masked as friendship. She has watched how quickly some women will smile to your face and cut you down the moment you turn away. She has learned that not every hand extended in friendship holds good intentions, and so she chooses carefully, sometimes choosing silence over noise, depth over familiarity, and authenticity over popularity. This world trains women to believe that their worth is measured by how many people like them, how many social circles they fit into, how social they appear online. But strength is not measured by how many people you gather around you. Strength is measured by how well you stand when you stand alone. There is a difference between loneliness and selectiveness. Loneliness is craving company. Selectiveness is valuing the right company. A woman who walks alone often knows her worth so deeply that she refuses to hand access to anyone who has not earned it. That is not isolation. That is emotional discipline. We talk about independent women in terms of finances and careers, but the highest level of independence is emotional independence. When you are no longer fueled by attention, validation, or approval, you become untouchable. Your peace becomes a fortress. Your presence becomes a privilege, and suddenly you stop chasing friendships and start attracting people who respect the gravity of who you are. This life is not about collecting connections, it is about cultivating the right ones. Walking alone does not make you less. It simply means you refuse to shrink yourself to fit inside circles that are too small to hold your spirit. You are not alone. You are selective, and that makes you powerful. There is a quiet power in a woman who knows how to sit with herself, understand herself, and build herself without needing a crowd to validate who she is. Emotional self-sufficiency does not mean coldness, nor does it mean shutting the world out. It means you have learned how to hold your own emotions, regulate your inner world, and meet your needs without depending on others for constant reassurance. Most people fear being alone because they have never learned how to be enough for themselves. They need constant noise, constant approval, constant company, not because they enjoy it, but because silence exposes the parts of them they have avoided. A strong woman chooses silence not to escape the world, but to hear her own thoughts clearly. Emotional maturity begins when you stop outsourcing your sense of worth. Many women fall into the trap of relying on friendships to feel valued. They need someone to text every day, someone to confide in, someone to constantly reassure them they matter. Strong women build that reassurance internally. They learn to say, I trust my judgment, I validate my feelings, I can sit with discomfort, I can comfort myself. When you cultivate that level of emotional self-trust, you stop fearing abandonment because you no longer abandon yourself. You stop fearing exclusion because belonging is not something you beg for. It is something you choose. You do not crumble because someone pulls away. You do not fall apart because a friendship ends. Instead, you understand that people come and go, and your identity does not hinge on who stays. That is freedom. When you learn emotional self-sufficiency, you become more discerning, because you are no longer choosing people out of need. You are choosing them out of alignment. You invite people into your life not because you fear being alone, but because you genuinely trust and value their character. That is what makes your relationships deeper, cleaner, and healthier. Some women struggle when they stop people-pleasing. Suddenly, those who benefited from their availability, their energy, their emotional labor begin to pull back. It can feel like losing friendships, but in truth, you are shedding dependency patterns. You are learning self-respect. When you stop overgiving, when you stop being emotionally accessible to everyone, your life becomes quieter. There may be moments when the quiet feels unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, but that is growth. A woman who learns to meet her own emotional needs is a woman who becomes whole, and wholeness is intimidating to those who survive on emotional chaos. People often mistake emotionally self-sufficient women for being hard or difficult. In reality, they are simply grounded. They do not react impulsively. They do not absorb drama. They do not beg for attention or argue to prove their worth. They do not chase apologies to feel closure. They understand that emotional reactions give power away, while emotional control gives power back. That composure is earned. It is built through self-reflection, boundaries, and learning from pain instead of letting pain define them. There is a psychological truth many overlook. When you do not need people, you show up to relationships with sincerity instead of fear. You give love freely because it is not tied to your identity. You connect without attachment to outcomes. You bond without losing yourself. You become capable of deep relationships, not because you depend on them, but because you choose them from a place of strength. When a woman reaches this level of inner stability, her energy changes. She carries a quiet confidence, a grounded stillness, a sense of presence that says, I am not here to be chosen, I choose. She does not chase friendships, but she honors real ones. She does not fear losing people, but she values genuine connection. She does not need a crowd to feel enough, because she has become her own anchor. A woman who masters her inner world becomes a woman who cannot be shaken by the external one. That is emotional sovereignty. That is strength. That is power that cannot be taken, only earned. There comes a point in a woman's growth when she realizes that not everyone deserves access to her inner world. Not everyone earns the right to hear her fears, her dreams, her doubts, or her hopes. Trust becomes something she gives thoughtfully, not freely. This is not guardedness. This is discernment. When you have lived, when you have experienced betrayal disguised as friendship, when you have seen how easily loyalty can turn into envy, you stop allowing just anyone to sit at the table of your life. You choose, and you choose carefully. Many women are taught from childhood to be open, to be friendly, to be accommodating, to trust quickly, share easily, forgive endlessly. Society praises women who are accessible. But there is a danger in being too accessible. You give people the power to know you, to read you, to use you. A strong woman learns that trust is not a gift, it is a privilege. And privileges are earned, not handed out at the door. Selective trust is not about being suspicious of the world. It is about being aware of human nature. Psychology teaches us something most people don't want to admit. Envy often hides behind admiration. People may appear supportive while quietly hoping you do not rise too far above them. Some friendships are not built on respect. They are built on comfort. As long as you are not doing better, as long as you stay where they are, the relationship feels stable. But once you grow, once you evolve, once you set boundaries and standards, the shift happens. It is not that you changed. It is that your growth exposed the true nature of the bond. There will be women who prefer to see you small, unsure, dependent, and accessible because it makes them feel secure. Once you step into your strength, once your confidence stops needing confirmation, they become uncomfortable. Growth threatens fragile egos. And so the strong woman stops giving her trust to those who cannot celebrate her wins, hold space for her struggles, and respect her boundaries. High standards in relationships are not about expecting perfection. They are about expecting integrity. You want friends who speak well of you when you are not in the room. Friends who do not hide bitterness behind compliments. Friends who show up without keeping score. Friends who do not feel threatened by your ambition or your peace. Friends who clap when you rise and pray for you when you fall. These relationships are rare, and that is exactly why you do not force them. A woman with high relational standards is often misunderstood. Some will label her distant, intimidating, hard to get close to. But the truth is simpler. She knows the difference between company and connection. She would rather walk alone than walk with the wrong people. She would rather sit in silence than sit in shallow spaces. This maturity comes from experience, from knowing how much peace costs to earn and how easily the wrong people can disrupt it. Selective trust also means you do not reveal your vulnerabilities to everyone. There is power in privacy. Some chapters of your life are meant to be protected, not displayed. When you stop explaining yourself to everyone, when you stop telling your story to those who only listen to judge or compare, you reclaim control. A strong woman does not need to be understood by many. She simply needs to be respected by the right few, and by herself. Having high standards does not make you difficult. It makes you aware. It means you refuse to settle for friendships built on convenience, gossip, or dependency. It means you know your energy is valuable. You do not offer loyalty to people who cannot match it. You do not pour into connections that drain more than they give. You are not cold. You are not unwilling. You are intentional. And here is the truth. The right people will not be intimidated by your standards. They will rise to meet them. The wrong people will fall away, not because you pushed them out, but because elevation requires character, and not everyone is willing to build theirs. That is not your burden to carry. When you trust selectively and hold high standards, you protect your emotional ecosystem. You create space only for authenticity, respect, reciprocity, and maturity. You may have fewer friendships, but the ones you have will be real. And that is better than 1,000 hollow voices cheering while secretly hoping you fail. In a world obsessed with noise, a woman who values peace becomes a rarity. Everywhere you turn, someone is demanding to be seen, heard, validated, and included. Social media celebrates constant connection, constant posting, constant access. Society has conditioned people to believe that relevance comes from visibility and belonging comes from attention. Yet the strongest women understand a truth many ignore. Peace is a luxury earned through discipline, and protecting it is an act of power. Protecting your peace does not mean shutting down emotionally or isolating yourself from the world. It means creating a deliberate boundary between your inner life and the chaos around you. It means you choose what enters your mind, what reaches your heart, and what influences your spirit. People often confuse peace with passivity, but peace is not stillness without thought. It is stillness with strength. It is a woman saying, I know who I am, I know what matters to me, and I will not hand control of my emotional world to anyone who has not earned that right. You begin to notice how loud the world actually is once you start protecting your peace. The constant opinions, the pressure to prove yourself, the expectation to entertain, respond, be available, be agreeable. Suddenly you see how draining it all is. And the moment a woman decides she will no longer participate in emotional chaos, she becomes misunderstood. Some people mistake quiet for weakness, when in reality, silence born from self-control is one of the highest forms of strength. It is far easier to react than to remain composed. It is far easier to be social than to be selective. Protecting your peace means learning the art of emotional boundaries. Not as a defense mechanism, but as self-respect. When you stop responding to every call for attention, when you stop explaining your decisions, when you stop engaging with unnecessary drama, some people around you may feel uncomfortable. Not because you are doing anything wrong, but because you are no longer accessible in the ways they were used to. The world does not like when a woman stops performing for approval. People take it personally when you stop choosing stress out of habit and start choosing peace out of intention. Psychologically, humans seek environments that match their internal state. When you cultivate peace within yourself, chaotic environments and dramatic personalities naturally fall away, not by force, but by incompatibility. Peace reveals who belongs in your life and who is simply filling space. You start noticing who respects your boundaries and who tries to cross them, who values your energy and who drains it, who wants your presence and who only wants your attention. This clarity can feel lonely at first, but it is the kind of loneliness that creates room for truth, not emptiness. A woman who protects her peace learns to say no without guilt. She withdraws from conversations that lead nowhere. She stops explaining herself to people committed to misunderstanding her. She chooses privacy over performance, quality over quantity, reflection over reaction. She begins to understand that not every invitation deserves acceptance. Not every argument deserves participation. Not every opinion deserves acknowledgement. Peace is not about avoiding life. It is about participating in life with discernment and strength. There will always be people who believe that a woman who chooses peace is avoiding reality. But peace is not avoidance. It is mastery. It is knowing that your life is too valuable to be spent in emotional turbulence, too meaningful to be wasted trying to prove your worth, and too precious to be shared with those who do not honor it. Strong women do not retreat from the world. They refine their relationship with it. They choose spaces that nourish them. They allow conversations that uplift them. They invest in people who match their emotional intelligence and self-awareness. Protecting your peace is an ongoing practice. It requires self-honesty, emotional maturity, and the courage to disappoint others so you do not abandon yourself. It means you trust your intuition when it tells you someone is not good for your spirit. It means walking away from noise even when everyone else is running toward it. It means choosing your internal world over external pressure every time. In a world that feeds on distraction, turbulence, and validation, protecting your peace is not a small choice. It is a declaration of sovereignty. A woman who guards her mind and honors her energy becomes untouchable. She does not move with the crowd. She moves with intention. She does not fear being misunderstood. She fears betraying her inner balance. Peace becomes her compass, her power, and her quiet rebellion against a world that tries to pull her in every direction. And when you learn to protect your peace, you begin to live from strength instead of survival. You begin to lead instead of follow. You begin to build instead of react. You stop being swayed by noise and become anchored in who you are. That is not isolation. That is mastery. That is a woman who is not controlled by the world, but instead controls her place within it. Female social dynamics are intricate, emotional, and deeply psychological. Women form bonds differently than men. They do not simply connect through shared activities, they connect through shared emotions, shared vulnerabilities, shared life phases. When these bonds are genuine, they are powerful. But because they are emotional in nature, they are also more sensitive to insecurity, comparison, and competition. A woman who rises, who evolves, who chooses independence, naturally disrupts the silent social contracts many women operate under. She stops playing the unspoken game of sameness. And that is often where tension begins. From a psychological standpoint, female friendships can be nurturing and loyal, yet also deeply influenced by comparison. Women are raised in a world that subtly encourages them to measure themselves against one another. Who is prettier? Who is more admired? Who has the better career, partner, lifestyle, confidence? Even in adulthood, this comparison culture lingers. Not because women are naturally competitive, but because society trains them to believe their value is relational, tied to acceptance, approval, attention. When one woman breaks out of that system and chooses confidence rooted in herself rather than in comparison, she becomes a mirror. She reflects back the insecurity others have not yet confronted. Strong women often become targets not because they are disliked, but because they represent what others wish they could be. Composure can trigger insecurity. Independence can provoke resentment. Self-respect can expose those who rely on external validation. When a woman refuses to gossip, refuses to seek approval, refuses to play small, she disturbs the hierarchy some women cling to. You may not be loud, you may not boast, yet your presence alone challenges those who build confidence by comparison instead of by character. Understanding this dynamic is not about arrogance, it is about clarity. Psychological research shows that envy is often silent. It does not always appear as hostility. Sometimes it appears as distancing, as subtle comments, as backhanded compliments, as sudden coldness, as support that only exists when you are struggling, never when you are thriving. A woman's growth tests the emotional maturity of those around her, and those who cannot grow with you will often find reasons to criticize or disconnect from you. This is why strong women frequently walk alone, not because they cannot form bonds, but because they refuse to participate in emotional competition disguised as friendship. They refuse to dim their light so others feel more comfortable in theirs. They refuse to bond through tearing others down, complaining, or sharing weaknesses simply to feel closeness. They seek friendship built on truth, not comparison. Growth, not jealousy. Support, not surveillance. Social psychology also reveals another important truth. People tend to keep those who make them feel safe, familiar, and unthreatened. When you evolve, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, you no longer fit the familiar mold. Women who thrive become different, and different often becomes misunderstood. You may find that the moment you start setting boundaries, choosing peace, prioritizing your goals, and valuing your time, people interpret it as distancing. They may call you cold or distant, not because you are, but because you no longer operate from people-pleasing, approval-seeking energy. You cannot carry every friendship with you into every version of yourself. Some friendships were meant for who you were, not who you are becoming. Growth demands space, and sometimes that space comes from separation. Not all distance is rejection. Sometimes it is protection. Sometimes it is evolution. Sometimes it is you honoring your emotional environment the same way you would protect your physical one. And here is the deeper truth. The strongest women do not compete. They rise. They do not envy. They inspire. They do not tear down. They elevate. They choose relationships rooted in mutual respect, where success is celebrated, boundaries are honored, and individuality is not feared. They understand that the feminine experience should not be a battlefield. It should be a sanctuary, a space where women learn from one another, support one another, and grow together. Yet until you find those women, you stand on your own, not as a loner, but as a woman who will not compromise her peace to belong. In time, real women will meet you at your level. In time, you will find friendships built on strength, not insecurity. In time, you will attract those who feel inspired by your presence rather than threatened by it. But first, you walk alone. Not because you are weak, but because you refuse to walk with those who cannot walk with truth. There is a profound difference between being alone and being in solitude. Isolation is rooted in fear, in avoidance, in retreat. Intentional solitude is rooted in strength, in clarity, in self-preservation. One is a reaction to pain, the other is a choice driven by self-awareness. When a woman chooses solitude, she is not running away from the world. She is stepping toward herself. She is making a conscious decision to withdraw from noise so she can reconnect with her inner voice, her values, and her purpose. Many people do not understand this distinction because they have never experienced solitude as power. They see a woman alone and instantly assume she is lonely. They assume she has no options, no circle, no support. But a woman who chooses solitude often has options. She simply does not entertain them lightly. She is selective. She knows that not all company is nurturing, not all crowds are supportive, and not all social spaces feed the spirit. Most people rush toward noise because silence forces them to face themselves. A woman who embraces solitude is one who has learned to sit with her thoughts, face her flaws, honor her needs, and build her inner strength without distraction. Isolation comes from a fear of connection. Solitude comes from a healthy relationship with self. Isolation says, I cannot face the world. Solitude says, I trust myself enough to stand apart from the world. Isolation shrinks you. Solitude expands you. In solitude, you discover your resilience, your identity outside of others, your inner voice that was buried under expectations and noise. You learn what you like, what you value, what you believe. You learn your patterns, your triggers, your strengths. You begin to understand yourself with depth. And a woman who understands herself becomes difficult to manipulate, silence, or control. There is also a misconception that solitude means refusing relationships. That is not true. Solitude prepares you for healthier relationships. When you learn to enjoy your own company first, you stop choosing people out of loneliness. You stop accepting crumbs because you no longer fear hunger. You stop tolerating chaos because peace has become familiar. You become someone who can walk away, not because you do not care, but because your self-respect is greater than your fear of being alone. That is not isolation. That is emotional maturity. The world often pressures women to be social, to be available, to belong everywhere. When a woman says, "I am good on my own," it unsettles that expectation. A woman who does not need the crowd becomes unpredictable, and therefore powerful. She is not swayed by opinions, not fueled by attention, not defined by approval. She moves with intention. She speaks with calm authority. And she connects only with those who bring value and truth, not noise and distraction. Solitude also builds emotional immunity. When you spend time with yourself, you are no longer overwhelmed by silence. You no longer cling to conversations just to fill empty space. You no longer accept surface-level company just to avoid being alone. Instead, you become comfortable with quiet, comfortable with your own presence, comfortable with stillness. That comfort is not emptiness, it is strength. Once you have built this foundation, presence becomes a choice, not a dependency. You do not fear quiet nights or solo walks or time spent in your own thoughts. You welcome them. And here is the thing women eventually learn. Solitude reveals what isolation hides. Isolation hides wounds. Solitude heals them. Isolation avoids reflection. Solitude invites it. Isolation stems from pain. Solitude nurtures peace. Once you understand this, you stop fearing alone time and begin valuing it as a necessary part of becoming whole. Some people will not understand your solitude, and that is fine. They have not reached that level of inner security. They still seek their identity in noise, in crowds, in validation. Your choice to step back may make them uncomfortable because your peace reminds them of the chaos they have not yet addressed within themselves. Do not let that pull you back into noise. Stay with yourself. Grow with yourself. Strength built in solitude becomes strength you never lose. You do not choose solitude because you cannot connect. You choose solitude because you refuse to lose yourself in the process of connecting. That is not loneliness. That is power. A woman who finds peace in her own presence becomes a woman who cannot be broken by absence. She becomes grounded, discerning, whole. In solitude, you are not without the world. You are simply aligned enough to enter it on your own terms. That is the beauty of choosing yourself first. When you rise alone, you learn you never needed the crowd in the first place. And when you return to the world, you return centered, complete, and unshakably in your power. There comes a season in every strong woman's life when she evolves beyond the world she once belonged to. Not because she believes she is better than anyone, but because she finally understands who she is meant to be. Growth is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, internal, and unseen, until the shifts are undeniable. You stop reacting the way you used to. You stop entertaining conversations that drain you. You stop seeking validation and start seeking purpose. You begin choosing peace instead of chaos, truth instead of comfort, discipline instead of familiarity. And suddenly, the people who once felt close begin to feel distant. Not because something dramatic happened, but because you are no longer standing where they left you. When a woman outgrows her environment, she experiences a bittersweet clarity. You start noticing the subtle ways people respond to your growth. Some become quiet, unsure how to relate to the new you. Some pull away because the version of you they were comfortable with no longer exists. Others become irritated, even critical, because your growth shines light on their stagnation. Not everyone claps when a woman rises. Some people only supported you as long as you stayed predictable and familiar. Growth exposes relationships with startling accuracy. People who once encouraged you may become indifferent when your success becomes real. Those who once relied on your emotional availability may resent your boundaries. And those who enjoyed your softness may feel threatened when you develop firmness. Outgrowing people is not an act of rejection. It is an act of alignment. You are not abandoning anyone. You are simply refusing to abandon yourself. There is an emotional shift that happens during this transition. Suddenly, silence feels healthier than forced conversations. Time alone feels more meaningful than social spaces that no longer reflect who you are becoming. You stop explaining your decisions because you realize that people committed to misunderstanding your growth will twist explanations into arguments. You learn that validation from others is temporary, but self-respect is permanent. And the deeper you grow into yourself, the less tolerance you have for relationships based on habit rather than connection, history rather than respect, familiarity rather than mutual evolution. Some will label you distant. Others may call you changed. In truth, you have simply grown past environments that demanded your shrinking. The woman who used to show up for everyone now shows up for herself. The woman who used to stay silent now speaks with calm confidence. The woman who once feared losing people now fears losing herself again. And that shift unsettles those who benefited from your old patterns. But here is the truth many never say out loud. When you outgrow people, they will feel it before you do. They sense the shift. They notice your tone becoming calmer, your presence becoming selective, your priorities becoming clearer. They feel your energy withdrawing from shallow spaces, and instead of rising with you, some will try to pull you back. Not because they truly care for you, but because your evolution reminds them of the work they have not done within themselves. It is tempting to shrink again, to dim your growth so others feel comfortable. But there comes a moment when you realize that going backwards does not restore relationships. It only breaks you. Maturity is accepting that you can love people deeply and still outgrow them. You can appreciate what someone meant to you and still walk away from who they are now. Growth is not betrayal, it is transition. And sometimes, the chapter that shaped you is not the chapter meant to hold you. With time, you learn to release without resentment, to detach without anger, to walk away without explaining. You begin trusting that your path requires different energy, different environments, different conversations, and different souls beside you. The right people do not fear your evolution. They evolve with you. They do not feel threatened by your strength. They are inspired by it. They celebrate your progress because they are committed to their own. And here is what many women eventually discover. Outgrowing people creates space for those who are aligned with your growth, your purpose, your peace, your discipline, your maturity. There will be friendships built on shared values rather than shared wounds. Bonds rooted in truth rather than insecurity. Relationships where you can grow without guilt, succeed without apology, and rest without performing. So if you feel distance growing between you and the world you once knew, do not panic. Evolve. Stand tall in your transition. Honor what once was, but do not cling to what no longer fits. Growth is not meant to be comfortable. It is meant to be transformative. And a woman who honors her evolution becomes unstoppable. Not because she stood alone forever, but because she learned to stand alone long enough to become the woman who no longer settles for anything smaller than her destiny. Choosing yourself does not mean isolating forever. It means surrounding yourself with people who align with your values, not out of loneliness, but from clarity. When you have built yourself from within, you attract connections based not on need, but on respect and resonance. Remember this. Solitude builds women into forces. Reflection sharpens intuition. Self-reliance reinforces dignity. Women who choose themselves first do not walk alone forever. They walk alone until they become strong enough to choose differently. And when they choose with intention, not desperation. You are not here to shrink. You are here to rise quietly, powerfully, intentionally. Stand in your truth even when it trembles. Protect your peace even when it is questioned. Build a life that feels like alignment, not approval. Surround yourself with depth, not noise. And when you choose, choose with strength, not fear. Because a woman who chooses herself becomes a woman who cannot be controlled, guilt-tripped, manipulated, or broken by the world. And that is the rarest, most powerful woman of all.